From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, along with Jeff Wichman. Coming up today from Iowa State University, Lee Schulz. On the cattle markets, Lee takes up a variety of topics, including his latest perspectives on U.S. beef exports, which he says are in a good place right now. Also today, K-State's Dale Blasi goes over the importance of preserving hay quality through baling and storage, saying that hay wastage can be greatly reduced by following a few simple guidelines when putting up planted forage or grasses as hay. And later, Jeff will have today's agricultural news headlines and this week's 4-H feature for you, where he'll be visiting with Kansas 4-H state leader Wade Weber. All that is directly ahead on this Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in to Agriculture Today. For observations on the cattle markets now, we bring in Lee Schulz. Lee is a livestock economist from Iowa State University, and he joins us regularly to hash over various things impacting the markets, and we have quite a smorgasbord of items we'll pick up on, Lee, as we go along. Before we get to those, though, looking back on this past week's trade, the Fed cattle market is just uneventful. It seems week in and week out. It's stuck in that narrow trading range, but managed, apparently, to maybe gain a little strength last week.
And I think you hit on it. It's stuck. I mean, we looked at Monday, we seen a lot of strength on the board. I think we got some positive fundamentals the previous week. And I think it maybe gave us some optimism and then really just kind of traded sideways all week. That is positive in the sense that we're kind of counter-seasonal right now. We've held prices. I think that has to do with box beef prices staying strong. So, I think it's how you look at it. But yeah, we're trading maybe a buck higher this last week, depending on where you are. But, I think the positives are we're starting to see, I think, supplies tighten up, and that may give some optimism here. The fact that cash prices are at a premium to the futures market may give us kind of the path of least resistance to see a bit more strength in the futures market. And that, I think, could bear well as we get into the next several months. You brought up boxed beef. Of course, it's still resilient. There's no sign that that market is going to fall off dramatically anytime soon. It's doing well, it appears, Lee. It is. And I think that's certainly a positive when we look at what we're seeing at the retail level, what we're seeing at the wholesale level, and what we should be seeing here, I think, reverberate into the live cattle market. The fact that we've had some staying power there, I think, is relatively important. And that's, something we'll continue to look at for positives in this marketplace. When you look at slaughter levels, they're looking similar to what we've kind of typically seen here. And so I think that's another positive signal that, we are pretty current in those marketing. What did you see this past week in the feeder cattle trade of any note? Well, when you look at futures markets, we were down a bit overall for the week. I think some of that's pressure from the corn market. But, I think realizing that we're entering really a key period here for feeder cattle, especially the yearling market. There's a lot. Typically, you see some seasonal strength there. I'll note that when you look at in the next several weeks, those placements of yearlings, those are going to be marketings into the early part of 2022. Given where the futures market is for live cattle, trading 137 or so for the February contract, there's some opportunities there to hedge some profits. Now, I don't think they're overwhelming profits, but, given what we've seen, I think that is some optimism there. And then if we do get some maybe strength in that basis or cash prices, those could even be better than what those hedged margins are. Excellent. Well, on this segment, we haven't talked much about beef exports to any length for time here, so let's do that. You described that scene overall as very positive. What are you observing there that has you enthused about our beef export status? I think going back to our previous discussion, we talk a lot about the domestic market and high retail prices, and consumers by and large are paying those higher prices. The same exact can be said for the export market. And so we've seen strong wholesale prices. Now, they have backed down a little bit from what we've seen in June, but they're still relatively high. My calculations are, almost 30% higher than the 5-year average, but exports continue to be strong. And that's not just the strength we've seen early in the year. We continue to see week over week strength in purchases for beef. Now, it's the traditional markets. Japan has been exceptionally strong here last several weeks, South Korea, but China is the third largest market here, and we continue to see strong purchases there. So, again, another optimistic factor in this marketplace.
And once more, no reason to think that momentum will fall off anytime soon?
No, I think it's given we've had some staying power here, I think provides some optimism. I like to really look at that weekly report that shows kind of outstanding sales. So it's that product that's been purchased for delivery sometime in the future. That's probably the most optimistic of all. I mean, you're looking at overall countries average 30% higher than where we were last year. So it shows that they're looking out. Now, some of that might be because prices are strong, so it's kind of a hedge against potentially higher prices, but it looks like that demand profile remains strong. Now, something to watch is obviously the economy as we're continuing to recover from the situation in 2020. Do we see a possible change in that trajectory, and does that impact beef demand? So far, I think a lot of the signs are positive, though.
Well, you always have an appetite for new numbers, and you say that the USDA has just put out some information that might lend some relevance to the cattle markets and to producers. The USDA putting out its farm production expenditures summary for the year 2020. Presumably that includes the cattle enterprises we see out there. Any indicators of note from that report?
Well, you did call me out correctly there, Eric. I am a nerdy economist, and I think, it really, these numbers help put things into context. And I've been talking about this all year, that really there's two factors driving these markets, or overwhelming factors. You have the demand pull, which we've talked about at length here, where, there's a lot of dollars chasing less and less beef that's available, right? But you also have this cost push inflation that maybe is not getting as much attention, but I think that's the thing that we're entering into as supplies are tightening, and it's costs more to produce beef. Feed costs are obviously a big part of that. And we can really see that day to day, right? You look at the futures market, what corn prices are doing. But it's kind of these hidden factors that, this farm production expenditure report really highlights that pretty much everything was up in 2020, maybe except for fuel. And we know compared to 2020, prices are even higher this year, costs are even higher for a lot of those factors. And so, I encourage folks when you're thinking about, yes, beef is costing more at the retail counter. A lot of people point to feed, right, and say, well, once feed prices start to decline, or if we have a bigger crop this fall, maybe you'll start to see price of beef come down. But I think we need to tap the brakes there a bit and say, hey, there's a lot of other factors that go into producing beef, and those are all higher. And those a lot of times don't come down in the short term. Those are a little bit more sticky. So realizing that cost of doing business is higher, and that says that marketing becomes that much more important, because you can only do so much to hedge against increased costs there. So that means you have to put the attention to getting you a little bit more certainty or locking in some of the revenue side of that equation.
Lending to that, you actually point out that as a specific here, with feed prices being what they are, backgrounding margins for those producers inclined to hold calves for that prospect, those are a little bit on the shaky side. So that would illustrate your point here as far as being astute managers.
It is. And so, we're always managing, both the revenue and the cost side of things. And this is a year where, as I mentioned, costs are higher, and you're maybe not getting the revenue buffer there that necessarily we've seen at least this time of year, looking forward into retained ownership. When you look at the futures markets for feeder cattle, that they're pretty flat from October forward. So that's one indication that you're not going to get much carry in the market necessarily. From a price standpoint, you might get it from a pound standpoint, but then you think about what it costs to put that weight on. And as we've talked, it's more expensive. So, I think this is going to be a real year to look at opportunities to, should I market those calves now? Maybe we see a run in a string of calves early, and that might be an opportunity to market some of those calves instead of holding on to them where it's going to cost a little bit more. And we have, some uncertainty in the marketplace.
As far as the market trends ahead for this trading week before us, Lee, anything thrilling that might be ahead?
Well, if past is the best predictor, I think, again, we're held into this kind of range that we're at. One thing I'm continuing to watch is we got a premium there of about $5 from that August to October contract. And I think that's going to incentivize maybe hold on to cattle a little bit longer. But that's also a thing to a little bit monitor here. So if we start to see that narrow up a bit, I think that's an indication maybe that supplies are a little bit more current than we expected. And we could see a little bit of strength in prices, maybe a little bit earlier than we normally expect. So one thing to watch there, but I think, we're likely to see some choppy trade again this next week.
Your input is always appreciated, Lee. We will talk again in a few weeks. Until then, many thanks to you.
Thank you.
He joins us regularly for a glance to the cattle markets, does Lee Schulz, livestock economist, Iowa State University. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues now. Well, we're in the thick of hay harvesting season in Kansas. That starts quite early with alfalfa, as you know, around the state. We're now edging into the time where we're putting up either cane hay or prairie hay. Appropriate that we talk a moment about the importance of storing that hay away. Might seem a simple topic, but it means everything when it comes to preserving that forage quality. And we've brought by once more beef cattle specialist Dale Blasi, K-State Research and Extension, with some guidelines on this. Again, it's not deep science here, but it's something that producers ought to probably pay at least some attention to, Dale.
Well, it certainly is important, Eric. You think about it, 6 months from now, they will be utilizing that product with their cow herd. And with 6 months in front of us, we certainly don't know what our weather conditions are going to be like, how deep they're going to have to dig into their existing supply, some of their pre-existing supply. It does deserve some respect in terms of thinking forward into 6 months.
The idea here is to minimize wastage, and that can occur a variety of ways, Dale.
Yes, it can, and certainly one of the first things a producer ought to consider for a variety of reasons is to, depending upon the forage type, if we're talking about a cane hay, really not going down to the ground and keeping that cutter head and leaving the majority of the stem out in the field. It benefits it from the soil conservation perspective, and it certainly will help reduce your waste as you utilize this material. Unless you do any subsequent processing to the roughage, the animals will simply just sort through it, and it'll just won't be utilized. It'll be a bedding source at best.
Does that apply as well to grassy hays? They're a bit of a different constitution there, of course.
Yes, of course. And yeah, especially this time of year, maybe to leave some growth there for our last frost-free day is sometime in early mid-October. And with, the spotty rains we've received, there's an opportunity for those native grass fields to get a little bit of relief and a little comeback, if you will, going into the winter. So I wouldn't go out there and try to scratch every last amount of dry matter and make a bale with it. I'd be cognizant of that and allow that material to recover prior to killing frost.
Once that bale is intact, keeping the weathering of that bale at a minimum, that gets back to where you store it, how you store it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and really the first step is making a dense bale. And, I can remember 30 years ago, Dr. Randy Taylor and I did some of the early work with the net wrap. And a lot of our producers do utilize that as an option. And really good formed, dense bales are really the first step forward for helping to shed moisture or what have you as we try to conserve our hay quality going into this 6 months down the road.
So how would you define a dense bale? Is there a measurement there, so to say?
Well, the rough rule of thumb is about 10 pounds of hay per cubic foot. A dense bale, it won't sag. Consequently, it'll have less surface area in contact with the ground, and it really protects that outer third of the bale, where if you were a geometric major, you would understand that there's a major portion of feed in that outer 12 inches of the bale.
So you made a dense bale. Where you place that bale and how you place bales in proximity to each other will also lend to shedding of moisture.
Right. And, another thing, too, just backing up, being cognizant of if we do get into a really inclement weather, storing the hay where it's accessible. And the quality of the hay based upon the feeding groups in the surrounding area the producer's going to use that hay for. If we're talking about early young age cows, you're going to use your replacement heifers. You want to keep your better quality feed somewhere in proximity to where you're going to feed it, but in a manner by which you can access it in the event that we do run into a period of really inclement weather, heavy snow or mud, ice, what have you. And you're absolutely right. Finding a site that has some degree of elevation to it to minimize any moisture penetration from the bottom of the bales, but just being mindful. I've always been nervous about seeing large amounts of hay stored along a public road in terms of the concerns over criminal mischief, if you will, throwing a match, all those sorts of things. And I understand a lot of people do that for accessibility, but all those things, I think, Eric, go into a good dense bale and placing it beforehand, knowing where it's going to be used down the road.
This would be the time to sort for quality as opposed to later on, that's for sure. Should one store those bales, those round bales, end to end? Does that help in minimizing storage loss?
Yeah, it does. You need to make sure that you have a southern or southeastern exposure to really maximize what little sun we have as we start to lose day length, that the bales have an opportunity to, after a moisture event, that there's an opportunity for good evaporation and the ability to remove the moisture from the upper edges of the bale. I've seen too many producers over the years, and, really it's a function of time, and time is one commodity we always try to work around. But baling hay and removing the hay off of the fields and placing them alongside the perimeter of the fields underneath trees is the absolute worst a producer can do, certainly from my perspective as a nutritionist.
You have preached that year upon year, and it's because of the moisture that is dropping from those trees.
Yes, and there's no opportunity for the bale to dry, and 1/3 of the weight of the bale can be found in the outer 6 inches. Yeah. And with any degree of moisture that does not have the ability to dry, you have basically a rotting going on, a decline in quality, which translates into the animals. Unless they're in real severe shape, they'll turn their noses up at it. And it's an expensive endeavor if it's not being fully utilized.
You mentioned earlier the net wrap. Broadly, beyond just that, should one cover the large bales with a tarp or any other kind of protective covering?
I think it's an expense to purchase plastic. To do anything to cover a bale is expensive. And I think doing all these easy-to-do, common-sense things is one way to get around that. Now, you can make an argument that you got some really, really, really good quality fourth-cutting alfalfa. Mm-hmm. And in that event, if you don't have the barn and assuming that you put it up at the appropriate moisture, you could maybe make an argument for that if you're going to earmark that quality of hay for, say, your first calf heifers, and you're really making an investment in it as a roughage, but as well a protein supplement.
Well, in the haste of putting up hay in a timely fashion, battling the weather and what other conditions might exist out there, one might get in a hurry in as far as putting that hay away for feeding later on. But you're just asking producers to give a little extra thought to this because the quality of that forage is at stake here. Yeah, and harvesting forage it's mundane. It's just one of those necessary evils our producers do. You know, we always pray for good, favorable weather to get the process done as soon as possible. But the consequences of what is being done now will play out 6 months from now. I mean, just consider under a drought situation, and maybe we got nitrate toxicity in a cane field, and if it's cut too close to the ground, and it just so happens that the nitrate concentrations are in the plants at that time, that's a consequence 6 months from now that a producer will have to manage around to work. So, you know, encouraging people to think about 6 months is when this stuff's we're gonna start to use it, hopefully not any sooner. And we need to ensure that what we do, we try to make as good a quality product as possible, because that does reduce your out-of-pocket. If you do the numbers and run the calculations using our ration software, you can pick up some improvements in out-of-pocket costs in terms of reducing your supplemental protein needs or what have you. Maximizing quality, maximizing volume of that hay. That's what it's all about as you're going about your haying here in the next weeks. Before we let you go, just a quick mention, because the details are now, you say, Dale, coming together. You'll be hosting the 2021 Beef Stocker Field Day here at K-State. We're not all that far ahead of that event. You're tying off the loose ends and putting together a great program, you say. Yes, we're looking forward to the 22nd annual KSU Beef Stocker Field Day. It'll be held at the Stocker Unit on September 30th, and I think we're going to have a really good program. We got a good mix for our producer panel. We have some really well-known producers, both Kansas and out-of-state producers. I think we've assembled a good group. We have some of our very own here in the departments of Ag Econ and colleagues of mine here in the Animal Sciences Department. I think we're going to have a good program. And after last year's program that we did strictly digital, I think we're chomping at the bit to get back to normal life and do what we try to do best. As we draw nearer to that time, we'll have you back over and lend more specifics to the listeners out there. But to get it on your calendar, producers, the Beef Stocker Field Day at K-State on Thursday, September the 30th. Dale, as always, thanks. Thank you, Eric. With some comments on storing harvested hay appropriately to maintain that value, that's Dale Blasi, beef cattle specialist, K-State Research and Extension, and we'll return after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wichman. In today's agricultural news, the latest USDA agricultural prices report reflects producers as a whole receiving more for their commodities in June. Rod Bain has more.
Modest gains in what ag producers receive price-wise overall for their commodities. The findings from USDA's latest agricultural prices report. For June, producers saw a 0.9% increase in prices for their commodities, a reflection of a 1.4% rise in what crop growers receive price-wise month over month, and a 7% increase in livestock prices received from the previous month. In the Crop Production Index, a 6.6% decrease in prices received for wheat and other food grains was offset by an 11% increase in the price earned by vegetable and melon growers, plus smaller month-over-month price gains for feed grains and fruits and nuts. The latest Livestock Production Index included an almost 3% gain in what meat animal producers received price-wise in June, countering an over 4% month-over-month decline in dairy prices received. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
As farmers across the country navigate drought conditions and rising feed costs, many are looking at ways to stretch feed inventories. Small changes in feed management programs can result in big savings. To help ensure feed inventories don't sneak away, ensure that heifer inventory matches your farm's future replacement needs to help manage tight feed inventories. Review cow cull rate, heifer survival rate, and the number of heifers born monthly. Reviewing semen use and ratio of sexed, conventional, and beef semen can also help curb costs. Carefully review data from your feed management software for mixing errors. Take feed inventories frequently and recalculate needs to determine when it's time to make a ration change to help stretch forage until the next crop is available. Keep your feeder aware of pen moves and number of changes before making a new batch of feed. Consider target weightbacks. Keep in mind shrink isn't just the feed that blows away. And feeding byproducts is another way to manage feed costs. If forage inventories are tight, consider dialing back inclusion rates early to use less byproducts over a longer period rather than adjusting them quickly. The 2021 Risk and Profit Conference is quickly approaching at Kansas State University. K-State agricultural economist Rich Llewellyn shares the purpose of the conference and the speakers who will be presenting. This event is being held in person at K-State in the Alumni Center August 19th and 20th, and there is an online option available as well.
Starts on Thursday with lunch, and then we have a keynote speaker who will be Matt Roberts, dealing with long-term grain prices and ethanol effects in the grain markets. And then we have breakout sessions that afternoon, then a conversation with a Kansas farmer in the evening on Thursday. Friday, it'll be 2 general sessions, 1 in the morning with grain markets, and then 3 breakouts in between, and then after lunch have a livestock outlook general session. So purpose is for farmers, for bankers, for crop insurance agents, agribusiness managers and folks. We have a lot of different people that come. Extension personnel are there as well. And so just folks to get together, to learn together, to talk to each other as well. And there's time for that in the evening and on Thursday afternoon especially.
A leading risk management consultant, Matt Roberts, is the keynote speaker at the conference. He'll cover the topic of markets in the long term.
Well, he'll be talking about the grain markets in a longer-term sense. A lot of times our outlook talks look at the next year or so and what's going on. This is looking a little further down the road, trying to discern, what some of the long-term trends might be, with trade and some of those issues, as well as where things might go in the energy market and their effects on the grain markets. So Matt has been in academia, but he's also been involved in the consulting and speaking world for quite a while now, too. And so does his own research, and it'll be some interesting stuff.
The conference also provides the chance for attendees to hear from a top Kansas agriculture producer. This year, Joe and Dana Newland from Southeast Kansas will be featured.
That's happened for about 10 years now. We've had that going on, and we kind of take different parts of the state, different types of operations, and this year, Joe and Dana Newland from down in Southeast Kansas will be joining us and talking about their operations, some of the things they've done, and how their kids are involved in the operation, too, and involved in agriculture. And so it'll be interesting to see some of the things they've done to grow their operation as well as involve the next generation.
That's agricultural economist Rich Llewellyn from K-State talking about the upcoming K-State Risk and Profit Conference. And it's not too late to get signed up. Do so by August 13th to get a break on the registration fee. To learn more about this conference, go to agmanager.info. agmanager.info. Well, if you got a USDA yield survey, you were not chosen at random. Gary Crawford explains the science behind the selection process.
As part of its data collection for the upcoming August forecast for crop yields and production,
we're surveying roughly 20,000 producers across the country,
asking them what they expect their yields to be. But Lance Honig with USDA Statistics Service says if you're one of the 20,000 who got a survey form, it wasn't a random thing where your name was pulled out of a hat. Farmers were carefully selected scientifically
to ensure that we have adequate representation across all the different growing areas. Obviously, there's more acres in certain places, so we're going to have heavier samples there. We need to make sure that we get more representation where there's more acres.
And get a good, accurate picture regionally because
conditions vary so much geographically across the country. This year is certainly no exception with some of the unusual weather that we've seen.
USDA will use the farmer survey plus satellite observations to put together its first survey-based crop production forecast, release date August 12th. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And finally, in today's agricultural news, this reminder about a field day coming up tomorrow. It's the Beef, Cattle, and Forage Field Day being held at Kansas State University Southeast Research and Extension Center in Parsons. Registration begins at 8:30 tomorrow morning, with the educational program starting at 9. Those unable to attend in person can watch via Zoom by signing up at www.southeast.ksu.edu. southeast.ksu.edu. The in-person presentations will be simultaneously broadcast on the K-State Southeast Research and Extension Center Facebook Live page. Topics include consumer responses to lab meats and labeling, interseeding annuals into perennial pastures, market positioning for cow-calf producers, strategies to increase yield and forage quality in hayfields, and essential oils and spices for growing cattle gains and effects on insects. A lunch will be provided following the educational meeting. Options for tours of the facility and current cattle research will be available following lunch. Again, for more information or to register, visit www.southeast.ksu.edu. That's southeast.ksu.edu. And that's a look at today's agricultural news. This is the K-State Radio Network. This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wichman. Kansas 4-H specialists and agents have faced a number of challenges over the last 18 months. Because of the pandemic, they were forced to make changes to program delivery and develop materials for both virtual and in-person learning, while keeping youth engaged in their project areas. Kansas 4-H state leader Wade Weber says that he learned a lot from that experience and has identified 3 obstacles and opportunities associated with encountering change. Wade, we are in the heat of county fair season and the state fair really not all that far off. You wanted to talk today about the opportunities that the young people are having to showcase the work that they've been doing, and really there's kind of some principles and some things that follow along with 4-H.
Absolutely. Well, as we know that the county fair and the state fair ultimately are wonderful public showcase venues for young people to share and show with the public what they've been learning about during the course of the year. And we acknowledge the fact that this year has been a year like no other, but yet the youth development mission in 4-H continues to move us forward, because we do know from the science that there are some things that we need to practice in order to help create that supportive environment for young people to continue to recognize their achievements and see that as value added, and to help them see themselves as people who can handle adversity, be resilient, and to move forward, no matter what the obstacles are in front of them or opportunities that are in front of them. And so I'd like to share a few principles, in some of what I've observed that can really help us move forward in a positive way into this county fair season.
A lot of this really deals with dealing with change and how we react to change.
Absolutely. And I think there's some things that we know from the science that helps us understand how we as humans, respond to change, and how do we adapt, and how do we engage with one another. And so there's 3 things that I'm going to share that are 3 obstacles. Then they're going to pivot, and we'll talk a little bit about the 3 opportunities. So one of the things that we've noticed this last year, and is true in many situations as well, is that when we get stressed and tired, it really affects our ability to be that supportive adult, that supportive environment for young people. And at the same time, it allows us to recognize the fact that we might be a little bit irritable. Now, it's true in the heat of the summer, we all get a little irritable. That's why we need a cold drink next to us when we're moving forward. But that being said, we just recognize those things, and sometimes we get discontent and we don't really know why. And so if we can acknowledge that obstacle, that stress and fatigue is an obstacle, I think that will help us in supporting young people. Secondly, we live in a day and age where there's a pretty high mistrust of authority, and we've noticed that this last year. It doesn't mean that people can't have their opinions. That's not what I'm saying. But when inherently there's a mistrust and suspicion related to authority or people who are responsible to make decisions on behalf of others, that can oftentimes be a complicating factor when it comes to creating a supporting environment for young people to feel as though that they're supported, as well as they're in a place that they can be known and have a valued contribution to that experience, say at a county fair. And then lastly, When we're tired, when there's a high suspicion or mistrust, then the obstacles oftentimes are also related to misinformation. In other words, we're prone to believe a lot of things. If it sounds too convenient, then maybe we should ask some additional clarifying questions. And so when we talk about the obstacles of stress and fatigue, when we talk about the obstacle of mistrust of authority, and then also acknowledge the fact that misinformation can lead us astray, I do think those are some critical thinking skills that will help us combat the three opportunities for us that really are the accelerators to help young people achieve and to find themselves in a positive environment going forward.
So as we look at the opportunities, then what kind of leads the way? I guess taking care of ourselves?
Absolutely. First and foremost, and that's part of the reason the first three is that it's really an exercise in being aware of the things that affect us as the caring adults in the room, with young people, because young people, just like sometimes working with their animals, can tell when we're stressed. They can tell when we're a little bit off. And so being able to take care of ourselves, and that could be everything from making sure you get enough water, when it's hot outside and you're, in the elements, so to speak. Make sure that you get your rest. Also looking for ways to purposefully take a break. I think those are some things that I know we've been seeing a lot of the research come out and say it really does affect us in ways that we're aware of, as well as ways that maybe we're unconsciously impacting us going forward. So that's first and foremost how we can move forward. Secondly, it's the ability to choose trust over suspicion. When it talks about building a connection and rapport, with young people, choosing to trust and give the benefit of the doubt oftentimes gives us the next opportunity to learn and to help, again, practice the things that help young people know that they're safe, that this is a place that they can thrive, and is a place that wants to help them achieve and to move forward. And so choosing trust over suspicion will help us be better problem solvers. And then lastly, really we know from the youth development science, engaging with young people, just like engaging with your neighbor, engaging with others, maybe even engaging with somebody who disagrees with you on how they should solve a problem, that engagement versus abandonment, engagement is always preferred. Why? Because when you choose to engage, even if you start off disagreeing, you at least have the opportunity to work together in the journey of problem solving. And oftentimes that's looking for ways to express care for the other person, respect for the other person, and then sharing a common future of saying, let's work towards a mutually beneficial solution whenever possible. And when we do those things, we create the environment for our 4-H youth to thrive.
Well, we often talk about learning by doing and understanding that this is going to help you later in life. And all of these obstacles and opportunities really do kind of lay the groundwork for building your future.
Absolutely. And, at the end of the day, 4-H Youth Development Mission is about helping young people, connect with resources and opportunities to help them grow in their capacity to see themselves as a learner, to see themselves as a communicator, to see themselves as a collaborator, and ultimately seeing themselves as a contributor to their local communities. Because when we talk about the mission work of Extension, it's really about enabling young people across the state of Kansas to become the future leaders we need to handle the problems that we don't even know about yet. But when we think about the science, we understand that everything from a county fair to a 4-H project can be the opportunity for young people to exercise those skills that ultimately we all as a community will benefit from as they grow those muscles of decision-making and working with others towards pursuing something that benefits their community. And so I hope that people remember that as we go through county fair season, as we get ready for state fair, that each one of those projects that you see in the county fair, at the state fair, there's a story behind each one of those exhibits that you see. And those stories are of young people across our great state who have been working with others in their community to make decisions that ultimately will in turn seek to benefit those around them.
That's Kansas 4-H State Leader Wade Weber. To learn more about 4-H, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wichman. This is the K-State Radio Network.